An entirely unique environment in the heart of Nottinghamshire. A rich ecosystem and home to an incredible range of species that definitely won't be moving out anytime soon.
My name's Joe McGeehan, and I'm a wildlife filmmaker, and I've spent the last few weeks exploring and capturing the magic of this site.
Its stunningly peaceful landscapes and thriving habitats, which really are teeming with life, have certainly provided plenty to work with. Join me as I take a closer look at the history, the habitats, and the species that make up the Attenborough Nature Reserve. As you walk around the reserve's trails, you are constantly reminded of the site's industrial past. From the bridges that cross the deep water lakes, to the rusting parts of heavy machinery left dotted around the site. One thing is clear. Nature is reclaiming this land, and she's doing it with huge success. So many species now call this area home, with many of them migrating over huge distances each year to return to Attenborough. This is testament itself to the rich ecosystem present here. But this wasn't always the case. The dramatic lakes that form the majority of the reserve's landscapes are a direct result of the gravel industry, which dominated much of Nottinghamshire throughout the 20th century. Situated on the banks of the River Trent, this site once held a rich deposit of sand and gravel, which remains in high demand today. Extraction works began on this site in 1929. And many of the lakes you see today are the water-filled pits that got left behind.
The reserve as we see it today owes its uniqueness to the gravel industry. The lessons learnt from the huge amount of work undertaken by Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust to bring life back to this industrial site is playing a vital role in how the industry plans for the future of its sites.
It was the fight to save the reserve over 50 years ago that led to the formation of the Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust. The site officially opened to the public in 1966. The construction of the Nature Centre followed several years later, opening in 2005, including a cafe, shop, conference venue and classroom. The centre is a brilliant asset to the reserve. The centre was opened by legendary natural history broadcaster Sir David Attenborough, and since then has attracted almost 3 million visitors, including 40,000 school children, providing an educational experience like no other.
Young people are the next generation of naturalists that are going to be going on to protect sites like Attenborough, so it's incredibly important that we enthuse them at an early age. We have to try and engage with them as much as possible and make wildlife seem as interesting and exciting as possible so that they can carry on doing our great work.
This is an incredible site, providing a chance for the people of Nottinghamshire to get even closer to nature. Wetland habitats constitute a major part of the ecosystem at Attenborough. The incredibly rich habitats are teeming with invertebrates, highly specialised plants, and much larger birds and mammals. The vast open lakes and isolated islands provide the perfect place for many species of birds and waterfowl to breed, feed, and socialise. It also gives us a chance to observe these behaviours up close. One of the key areas for spotting wildlife are reed beds. They lie at the borders of lakes and rivers, bridging the gap between land and water. Many species find refuge in their thick vegetation, including reed warblers, bitterns, many invertebrates, and even otters or water voles, though you'd be very lucky to spot one of those. Reed warblers spend their summers in the UK, building their nests as slings between several individual reeds. They are a common victim of brood parasitism, with cuckoos often placing their own eggs in the warbler's nest for them to raise. Once hatched, the cuckoo chick will push all other chicks out of the nest so it can get all the food. Reed beds are truly diverse and dramatic habitats. However, they are under threat. Large-scale drainage schemes meant many areas were lost as agricultural land throughout the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries. Luckily for us, all the reed beds at Attenborough are thriving. A much beloved resident of almost all our waterways and bodies. The Mallard Duck. Its iconic call is recognised universally, and they continue to charm the public up and down the country.
I've been following this family of ducks for 2 weeks now. The ducklings started off so small and they've grown so fast. And they've really started to gain courage.
After growing in the safety of their eggs for around 28 days, the ducklings all hatch together. Their mother will then lead them to water after around 10 hours. The sooner they get to the water, the better their chances of survival. The ducklings are covered in a fur called down, and it will take around 2 months for them to fully mature and be able to fly. These fledgling ducks still have a bit of a ways to go. In the early weeks, they are reliant on their mother for protection and guidance. But even by the end of the 2 weeks I spent with them, they were exploring further and further away from Mum's safety. They always came running back when called though. Throughout this time, life for ducklings is precarious. Anything that can fit them in their mouth will try to eat them, including foxes, owls, and even their neighbours, the grey heron. Best not to stray too far from Mum's watchful eye. The young ducklings will grow fast, feeding on pondweed, grasses, and even flies. They don't become herbivores until they fully mature. Once fledged, it takes a year for them to reach full sexual maturity, and then they can rear a family of their own. Mallard ducks aren't the only ones raising infants around this time. The reserve is ringing with the sound of Canadian goslings. Widespread throughout the United Kingdom, the Canada goose spends all year here due to our mild climate. Introduced from North America, these noisy neighbours from across the pond are sometimes considered a nuisance when present in large flocks, and they certainly form large flocks at Attenborough. Canada geese are instantly recognisable, with their greyish-brown bodies, dark black neck and head, with an unmistakable white chin strap. Even if you don't see them, you'll recognise their loud honk as they fly overhead in characteristic V formation. The largest species of goose in the world, and they certainly have an appetite to match. Be prepared for them to swarm you if you have any food. Canada geese mate for life and can become very territorial around mating season. Each pair will lay around 6 to 8 eggs, with chances of their goslings surviving very low. Goslings will typically remain reliant on their parents for around a year, but they quickly find their legs, grazing on anything and everything they can find. The goslings quickly become very sociable, forming large packs which can encompass several families of goslings. Parents will remain fiercely protective of their young, and goslings can often be seen single file in between two parents. Grasslands are one of the core habitats in the United Kingdom, supporting a huge range of native plant and animal species. Grass itself is an incredibly sturdy plant, but one which is ecologically very important. In the process of colonisation, where land is reclaimed by nature, grasses are often one of the early pioneer species. From the smallest insects up to the largest birds, these grassed areas are an essential supply of food and nutrients for all species, whether they eat the plants themselves or prey on the smaller creatures that do. Almost all food chains start here. A common sight in any meadow during the summer. A male damselfly. After spending around 12 months growing under the water, when they emerge as winged adults, they only have a few weeks left to live. And they have one goal for this time: to find a mate. Before pursuing this goal, time to grab a quick bite to eat. Damselflies will eat small, soft-bodied insects, such as aphids and mosquitoes. Once this male is finished, it's time to fly. The target? A female. Males will perform complex and extravagant flight maneuvers to impress the female. It really is quite the display. This male thinks he's found the one for him. By grasping the female tightly behind her head, using claspers at the tip of his abdomen, he prevents any other male trying to mate with her. Success. Once grasped, the female will bend her abdomen round to join with the male, forming the wheel. The male will fertilise the female's eggs, which can take up to 5 minutes. Once complete, the female will head straight for water, where she will lay her eggs in the shallows, all under the watchful eye of the male, who will protect her from any other damselflies. In a year, the young will emerge, and the cycle begins again. English meadows have remained relatively unchanged over the last several hundred years. However, in recent years, we have seen a variety of non-native and invasive species take up residence in our grasslands. Whilst many cause little impact on native species, one insect introduced from South Asia is causing a negative effect on its native cousins. This species is the harlequin ladybird. By outcompeting our native ladybirds for food, we are now seeing a significant decline in native ladybird species, such as the two-spot ladybird. Harlequins are much larger than this type of native species, and will simply devour them if they come across one in the wild. On top of this, their habitats and prey, primarily aphids, directly overlap, so competition is rife. Harlequins also eat other ladybirds' eggs and larvae. None of our native species are safe from this voracious predator. Their numbers have boomed over the last 14 years following their introduction. They breed continually throughout spring and summer, so their population can quickly grow, giving them a competitive edge. Harlequin ladybirds are extremely variable, with up to 19 black spots on a red or orange background. They have a distinctive white triangle on the centre of their head, something that is not present on any of our native species. These ladybirds will spend winter indoors, swarming into homes and buildings across the country. So keep an eye out as temperatures begin to drop. You may be having some lodgers in your home. Insect life thrives in areas of grassland. And without their presence, grasslands would not be able to survive. This close relationship between plant and insect is all down to pollination. Pollination is the process where plants reproduce and create offspring. Flowers are the tools they use for pollination and reproduction, usually being the location where seeds are created. Seeds can only be produced when pollen is transferred between flowers of the same species. The main pathway for this transfer is insects. Without pollinating insects, such as bees, hoverflies, butterflies, plants would not be able to reproduce. This would have devastating effects on biodiversity and human life. It is estimated that 1 out of every 3 mouthfuls of food we eat is entirely reliant on pollination. 84% of all EU crops depend on pollination, with almost all fruits and vegetables requiring this process. Despite the huge importance of pollination, grasslands and the pollinating insects that call them home are under threat.
Today in Britain, only 2% of our grasslands are classified as unimproved according to the Wildlife Trusts. Areas such as this are vital habitats for several species of insects, plants and animals.
Here at Attenborough, the areas of grassland are protected and maintained to ensure these insects continue to keep the reserve alive. Through their efforts, plants and flowers continue to support several species of insects, which in turn attract hundreds of birds and larger mammals. Grasslands play a vital role in the biodiversity present at Attenborough. Attenborough Nature Reserve is a huge site containing a multitude of habitats. Maintaining them is essential for ensuring the survival and continued presence of several species found on the reserve. Conservation is a fundamental aspect of reserve life, from supporting the wildlife to engaging with the wider public.
The primary purpose of Attenborough Nature Reserve is to provide a habitat for many species of wildlife, and of course then to educate people and enthuse people to get excited about wildlife and how wonderful the natural world is, so that they can become ambassadors for Attenborough later on and protect it and carry on looking after this place for generations to come. The Wildlife Trust, as early as 1966, started working on the reserve and creating the habitat. So we've been protecting and enhancing the quarry site for many, many years, over 50 years now. And we've had to retrospectively do a lot of the management work and large-scale earth movements to create the habitats that you see today. And Clifton Pond is probably one of the most unique and varied habitats on the reserve. It's got a lot of shallow water, so we get a lot of different species there. It's also away from the confluence of the Erywash as well, the river that flows in through the reserve complex. Originally the banks were breached so that they could facilitate the barge movements through the reserve complex, but of course that brings in pollution into the reserve and agricultural runoff, so fertiliser and things like that, which change the water quality. Clifton Pond being away from that influence means that we get many more aquatic invertebrates, and of course then the bird species that you find around there are much greater and more exciting as well. We spend an awful lot of time both with volunteers and paid staff. So we have some 450 volunteers on the books here at Attenborough, so they carry out a lot of the management work for us. Much of the management work that we have to do is controlling invasive species. So plants like Himalayan balsam, for instance, which was introduced by Kew Gardens back in the 1800s, is a real nightmare for us, and we have to spend some 2,000 volunteer hours a year just pulling that one species of non-native invasive plant. Otherwise it would just shade out all the natural and native species from the light. So we tend to leave the management to be as natural as possible, but obviously we do need to intervene in places. Areas like the Delta Woodland, for instance, we manage in a very traditional manner, so we create rides and glades, and we also coppice various compartments to create a varied structure. But that's more to maximise its potential for wildlife rather than a sort of strict management regime. Climate change is quite a new challenge for us as well. We don't quite know what the effect of that is going to be on our native species as yet, but certainly in the time that I've been here, in the last 15 years, we've seen species like the willow tit, for instance, disappear from Attenborough, and it used to be one of the strongholds in Nottinghamshire for that species. So the species change. We've seen many more invertebrates than we would have recorded in the past, certainly that have had a very southern distribution. So whether that's an impact or effect of climate change, I don't know, but we'll see what the future has in store for us. I think the biggest large-scale project that's going to happen is when the gravel company actually do leave the site here. So they have an awful lot of mitigation work to undertake before they can actually leave. So removing some of the bridges is going to take place before they go, filling in the gap in the River Erywash and rerouting it back to its original course into the River Trent. That's going to be a very large part of the groundwork that's going to be carried out on the reserve. And after that, I'd like to hope that we can have a period where the reserve can just settle and restore back to nature, really, to be honest. We've done quite a lot of large-scale projects over the last 10, 15 years, and it would be nice for it just to have a bit of peace and quiet for a while and restore it to nature.
It's hard to imagine how a gravel extraction site could become such a haven for wildlife. So why not head down to Attenborough Nature Reserve and immerse yourself in the rich ecosystem present there. With your support, areas like this can continue to grow and thrive for generations to come.